All right, guys, we're going to be on page 3 in your notebook, and the title of this is going to be Perfect Squares and Cube Roots. So we're going to start on your notes under Perfect Squares. Everything should be formatted just like we talked about in class, and now we're going to go fill in our notes together. So here, it says the square of an integer is called a perfect square. And let's think about what a square is. We all know a square is a figure. It's a two-dimensional shape. And we know that in a square, both the length and the width are the same size. So if you think about your exponent as the sides of a square, it's going to start to make a lot of sense. So we know that 1 squared in expanded form stands for 1 times 1, which is like saying if your length is 1 and your width is 1, what would be the area? Well, 1 times 1 is 1, and that would be units squared. So 1 squared is 1. 2 squared would be like saying the length is 2, the width is 2, which makes the area 4. So I want you to pause the video, go along with these, and see if you can fill them in, and then we can check our answers together. Okay, you should be back, so I'm going to fill these in. 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25, 6 squared is 36, 7 squared is 49, 8 squared is 64, 9 squared is 81, and 10 squared is 100. Okay? Now, the opposite of squaring a number is finding the square root. So let's take a look at what that is going to look like. Positive numbers actually have 2 square roots. And we don't think of it that way, but they do. But let's talk about why that would be. What number can you square to get 16? And remember, we're squaring. It's a number times a number. It's the same number times the same number, which gives us a product. So if we want to get 16, well, 4 times 4. 4 times 4 is 16, so 4 is going to fit that bill right there. But is there another integer that will give us 16? What about negative 4? Negative 4 times a negative 4 would also give us 16. So there's actually 2 square roots there. All right, so you got that one. Excuse me, sorry guys, I got to turn to my notes because I'm going to cheat here in a little bit. Negative numbers have 0 square roots. There's not a number that could produce a negative 16. It's just not possible. You can't do a negative 4 times a negative 4 is not going to give me a negative 16. It would give me a positive 16. So you can have no square roots for a negative number, right? What number only has 1 square root? 0. 0 is the only integer that has 1 square root because the square root of 0 is just 0. It's 0 times 0 gives us 0. So those are the notes to square roots. Let's take a look at radical notation. All right, radical notation is a way for us to check on square roots and cube roots. So if I look, it's the radical sign is what this is called. The radical of, so it's the square root of x, that's what we say, is used to indicate the square root of x. So the square root of x is used to indicate the positive square root, just like we talked about above for our example of 16. So this would be the square root of 4. If I had the square root of 16, it would be 4. This negative is used to indicate the negative square root of x. So notice this negative sign is not included inside the radical. It's included outside the radical because this negative 16 just is not possible. We cannot do this until you get to Algebra 2. Then we talk about imaginary numbers. But so far, this is not possible. But you can have a negative outside because that's used to determine that we have a negative 4. Like a negative 4 times a negative 4 is still going to give us that square root of 16. So negative. I'm going to do a couple of these examples together with you, and then I want you to pause the video and then come back and I will tell you the answers. So we're going to do examples 1, 4, and 7 together. So the square root of 49, it's 7. 7 times 7 gives us 49. What is the negative square root of 289? That would be negative 17. Negative 17 times negative 17 gives us a positive 289. And how do you take the square root of a fraction? You take the square root of the numerator and you take the square root of the denominator, which would give us 1 over 4. So I want you to pause the video, come back, and I will give you those answers. Number 2 is 3. Number 5 is negative 14. Number 8 is negative 9/5. Number 3 is negative 2. Number 6 is 22. And number 9 is 7/12. If you have any questions over these examples, I want you to come see me in tutoring tomorrow so we can talk about it. All right. All right, so here we have perfect versus non-perfect squares. We already know what a perfect square looks like. It's these above because there's one number that will produce a 49, 7 times 7. So let's quickly circle these. I want you to go through. I want you to pause the video, go through, circle the ones you think, and then I'll come back and give you the answers. Okay, so let's take a look. 9 is a perfect square root. 121 is a perfect square root. 1 is a perfect square root, 64 is a perfect square root, and 324 is a perfect square root. So if these are perfect square roots, what are these called? These are called non-perfect square roots. Kind of makes some sense there. All right, so flip that page over. And let's talk about how we estimate non-perfect square roots. If I know my perfect square roots, it makes the estimating much, much easier. Because I know that the perfect square root in between 10 would be square root of 9 and square root of 16. So square root of 10 falls somewhere between the square root of 9 and the square root of 16, which the square root of 9 is 3, the square root of 16 is 4. So it's going to fall somewhere between 3 and 4. So that's what we mean estimate between which whole integer. Square root of 115 falls under the square root of 100, which is 10. And the square root of 121, which is 11. So I know that the square root of 115 is going to fall between 10 and 11. I want you to go ahead and pause the video and see if you can fill these in, and I will come back with those answers. Okay, number 12, you should have between 7 and 8. Number 13, you should have between negative 6 and negative 7. Number 14, you should have between negative 1 and negative 2. And number 15, you should have between negative 14 and negative 15. If you need help with that, come see me tomorrow in tutoring. 16 through 18, I want you to make a question mark in your notes because we're going to come back to that in class. So that's one step more that we have to do to estimate between the nearest 10. So we will do that in class together. Now we get to perfect cubes. Well, perfect cubes are kind of like perfect squares in that it's a number that can be repeated to give me a product. So the cube of an integer is called a perfect cube. And when you think about a perfect cube, it always makes you imagine, well, we have a cube. So if I have a cube here, what do I know about a cube? Well, I know a cube, it has the same base, length, and width, or length, width, and height. So a perfect cube, all the dimensions are the same. That's how we get volume, because cube is talking about volume. We fill up that two-dimensional shape. And that's why you always see our units are cubed when we have cubic units. So 1 cubed just means 1 times 1 times 1, which is 1. 2 cubed means 2 times 2 times 2, which I'm going to get 8. And I want you to pause the video now and go back and fill these in. So we should have 27, 64, 125, 216, 343, and of course I am cheating on these, and I'm looking at my notes. 512, 9 cubed is 729, and 10 cubed is 1,000. Okay? All right, so now let's look at cube roots. Well, it's the opposite. So the opposite of cubing a number is finding the cubic root, similar to what we did with square roots. Now, here's the difference. All integers have only one cube root. Why is that? Well, what numbers can you get to cube negative 8? You can get 2, because 2 times 2 times 2 is always going to be 8. But can you take the negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 to get me a positive 8? You can't. You can't do that because these two negatives would create a positive 4, and a 4 times a negative 2 would give me a negative 8. So there is only one cube root of a cubic cube root. What number can I cube to get negative 8? The only number that you can cube to get negative 8 is a negative 2. A negative 2 times negative 2 times a negative 2 would give me a negative 8. And the radical sign is different for a cube root. This little 3 out here tells the reader that it's 3 numbers when multiplied together give us this product underneath the radical. Square root, it's always assumed because that's the most popular, so we just assume there's a little 2 outside there. But a cubic root is different, and it always has to include this number 3, which you need to have on quizzes and tests. So make sure you always put that little 3 in there. All right, so on number 19, what number can I multiply together to give me 64? Well, 4 times 4 times 4. So the cubic root of 64 is 4. I want you to pause the video and then fill these in and come back and I will give you those answers. Okay, so we should be getting 7 is the cubic root of 343. Negative 3 is the cubic root of negative 27. Negative 1 is the cubic root of negative 1. Negative 13 is the cubic root of negative 2,197. And 8 is the cubic root of 512. So hopefully now you have a better understanding of square roots and cube roots. Tomorrow in class we will do that homework together and also talk about scientific notation. So make sure you have filled out all your notes. And if you have any questions on the notes that we've covered, come in and see me in tutoring tomorrow.